The desert quiet wrapped around them, but the firelight kept loneliness away. Nayeli found herself studying Elias, the way his hands moved with precision, the calm in his voice. She wondered what roads had shaped him, what trials had carved his strength. For the first time since losing her way, her spirit felt less like a drifting shadow and more like a flame reigniting. Morning painted the dunes in gold. Elias offered her food, dried meat and hard bread. It was simple, but tasted like a feast after days of emptiness. Nayeli thanked him with a soft smile. He did not press her with questions, only told her they would travel toward the river together. The thought of water, of life renewed, filled her with hope. As they journeyed, the silence between them was not empty but steady, like a song without words. Nayeli walked slowly, still weak, and Elias adjusted his pace to hers. The desert, once cruel and unforgiving, seemed to soften around them. With him by her side, every step forward felt possible, as though fate itself had chosen this meeting. By midday, heat pressed down like a weight. They paused beneath a rocky outcrop, sharing the shade. Elias spoke of distant towns, of markets filled with colors and noise. Nayeli listened in wonder, picturing such places she had never seen. In return, she told him of her people's dances, of drums echoing beneath the stars. Their worlds merged through stories. That evening, a storm brewed on the horizon, rolling clouds like mountains in the sky. Elias secured their packs and guided her to a sheltered ridge. Lightning flashed, illuminating the desert in violent beauty. Nayeli pressed close, shivering not only from fear but from awe. The storm reminded her of life's fury, but Elias's presence anchored her heart. When dawn returned, the desert was cleansed, the air cool and sharp. Puddles gleamed like mirrors, and Nayeli bent to drink, her reflection rippling in the water. She saw not just a weary traveler but a survivor, stronger than the days before. Elias watched in silence, respectful, as though he too recognized the spirit that burned within her. As they walked, the land shifted from endless dunes to stretches of dry brush. The horizon promised change, though the journey was still harsh. Nayeli leaned on Elias's steady pace, her strength slowly returning. Each step away from despair brought her closer to trust. The desert no longer felt like a prison, but a passage. At night, Elias sang low tunes in a language Nayeli did not know. His voice was deep, steady, carrying warmth into the darkness. She listened, letting the melody fill her heart. It reminded her of home, of songs her people sang around fire. For a moment, she felt as though she belonged again, no longer lost in silence. One morning, they spotted vulture shadows circling above. Elias tightened his jaw, guiding Nayeli away. He knew death was never far in the desert, but he shielded her from its cruel reminder. She noticed the quiet strength in his choices, the way he placed her survival before his own. Gratitude deepened, warming her soul like sunlight. As days passed, Nayeli's spirit grew lighter. She began to laugh softly at Elias's dry humor, surprising herself with the sound. He looked at her, eyes soft, as though her laughter was the rarest treasure. Their bond was wordless yet strong, woven not through promises but through shared endurance, trust, and the quiet moments of survival. They reached a canyon where water trickled between stones. Kneeling, Nayeli cupped her hands, drinking deeply. It was life itself pouring into her. She looked at Elias, who watched with relief. In that gaze, she felt not pity but respect. He had not saved her out of duty but from something deeper, a connection unspoken yet undeniable. At the canyon's edge, they rested beneath mesquite trees. Elias told her about a time he too was lost, wandering without direction. He confessed that helping her gave him purpose again. Nayeli's heart stirred. Perhaps neither of them was meant to walk this desert alone. Perhaps fate had woven their paths together for reasons beyond survival. That night, the air was gentle, scented with sage carried by the breeze. Nayeli dreamed not of thirst or despair but of rivers flowing, of her people's laughter. When she awoke, Elias was watching the star. She joined him, their shoulders brushing. Words were not needed. The silence between them spoke of safety, trust, and possibility. As dawn broke, the desert bloomed faintly with color. Tiny flowers pushed through the sand, resilient and bright. Naomi bent to touch them, marveling at their persistence. Elias watched her quietly, admiring how her spirit mirrored the blossoms. What survived the desert was not only the strong, but also the hopeful, and she embodied both. They continued onward, passing through jagged rocks that stood like ancient guardians. Naomi placed her hand on the stone, feeling its heat. She whispered a prayer to the spirits of the land, asking for guidance. Elias, though unfamiliar with her words, bowed his head in respect. Their paths were different, yet reverence bound them together. That evening, they shared a meal in silence. The fire crackled, sparks rising into the night. Elias finally spoke of loss, of family gone to sickness long ago. Naomi listened, her heart soft. She reached across the fire, her hand brushing his. For a fleeting moment, two wounds touched, not to deepen pain but to heal. The desert wind rose suddenly, swirling sand around them. Elias moved close, shielding Naomi with his cloak. She felt his warmth, his steady strength holding her against the storm. When the winds passed, she remained near, reluctant to let go. It was no longer just survival, it was comfort, the quiet promise of belonging. Days later they reached higher ground. From the ridge, a faint green shimmer stretched in the distance. The river, Elias said, his voice filled with relief. Naomi's heart leapt. After endless sand and thirst, water called like salvation. They quickened their pace, the horizon no longer empty but filled with hope and light. When they reached the riverbank, Naomi knelt and wept. Cool water rushed over her fingers, the sound singing in her ears. Elias stood behind her, watching with gentle pride. He had found her on the edge of death, and now she rose renewed. In that moment, he realized he had found refuge too, not in a place, but in her. At sunset, they sat by the river, letting the sound soothe their weary souls. Naomi told him of her people's songs of renewal, how rivers were lifelines binding earth and spirit. Elias listened, drawn to her voice. He understood now the desert had not been a place of loss, but the path that brought them into each other's arms. Naomi bathed her hands and face in the river, letting the coolness erase the desert's cruelty. Elias filled their canteens, his movements steady, practical, yet his eyes softened each time they met hers. For both, the river was not just water, it was rebirth, the place where despair finally loosened its grip and gave way to possibility. They built a small camp under cottonwood tree. Birds sang above, their voices sharp and alive compared to the desert's silence. Naomi closed her eyes, listening, remembering her people's ceremonies that honored such sound. Elias watched her with quiet respect, recognizing that she carried something sacred within her, strength tied to land and spirit. As the days passed, they lingered by the river. Naomi's health returned, her cheeks no longer hollow, her steps no longer weak. Elias taught her how to fish with a line, laughing when her first catch slipped from her grasp. For the first time in weeks, joy rippled between them like sunlight on the water's surface. Yet beneath the peace lay questions neither dared to voice. Where would she go when she was strong enough? Where would he travel next? The desert had brought them together, but fate's road was uncertain. Naomi felt a stirring fear of losing not her life this time, but the fragile bond that had grown between them. One evening, Elias offered her a carved wooden charm, small but finely made. He told her it had guided him through lonely travels. Naomi held it close, her eyes glistening. She whispered a prayer of thanks, promising to treasure it. Though neither spoke of love, the gesture was a vow, one carved not from words but from devotion. The river became their sanctuary, but whispers of the desert still haunted Naomi's dreams. She dreamt of dunes swallowing her home, of shadows chasing her through endless sand. Each time she awoke, Elias was there, steady and calm, reassuring. His arms were not chains but shelter, the refuge she had once thought impossible. On the 10th morning by the river, they decided to move onward. The world beyond still waited, with its challenges and unknowns. Yet as they packed, Naomi realized she no longer felt like a wanderer lost. She was part of a journey shared, and whatever road stretched ahead, she knew she would not face it alone. They followed the river's bend, walking through groves where willows dipped their branches into the current. Life flourished here, deer tracks in the mud, birds darting through the air. Naomi marveled at how quickly the world could shift from barren silence to overflowing abundance. Beside her, Elias seemed lighter too, as though the river had washed grief from him. At dusk they stopped near a bluff overlooking the water. The sky burned crimson, fading into violet. Naomi watched the horizon, her heart full yet unsettled. She turned to Elias, wanting to speak but hesitating. He sensed her silence and simply placed his hand over hers. The gesture said everything. She was not alone, not any. One night, under the blanket of stars, Naomi shared her fear of never finding her people again. Elias listened quietly, then told her that home was not always a place, but sometimes the arms that welcomed you. She trembled at his words, for they echoed what her heart already knew, that perhaps her refuge was here in him. The days became a rhythm, travel by morning, rest by water at noon, firelight by night. Their companionship grew into something deeper, though still unspoken. Each glance lingered longer, each laugh carried more warmth. Naomi realized that survival had become more than living. It had become the discovery of trust, of kinship, of love's quiet bloom. When a group of traders passed along the river, Elias exchanged goods while Naomi watched from the shadows. The men looked curious at her presence, but Elias kept her close, protective. She felt a surge of safety, knowing he would shield her if danger came. It was then she understood. Their bond had already become family. As they pressed onward, the land opened into wide plains dotted with grass. The desert was behind them now, a memory of struggle and salvation. Naomi looked back one last time, whispering thanks to the spirits for guiding her to Elias. The sands had tested her, but in that trial she had found something greater than survival. That night, firelight flickered against the tall grass. Naomi sat close to Elias, their silence filled with meaning. She thought of the desert, how it had stripped her bare, only to offer her this unexpected gift. Elias, once a stranger, had become the one who steadied her heart. She leaned against him, and he let her rest, his arm protective and warm. The plains carried different sounds than the desert: crickets at night, rustling grass, distant howls of coyotes. Each noise reminded Naomi that the world was alive again. Fear no longer gnawed at her. Instead she carried wonder. She felt herself opening like the desert flowers after rain, fragile yet unyielding in her bloom. As dawn rose pink across the sky, Elias turned to her, his eyes serious. He asked where her heart wished to go, back to her people, or forward into unknown lands with him. Naomi hesitated, her spirit torn, but when she looked into his gaze, steady and kind, she realized the desert had already answered. Her path was no longer solitary. They continued walking, the horizon endless yet no longer threatened. Naomi felt the weight of her ancestors behind her, guiding her steps, approving her choice. Elias carried her burdens as though they were his own. Together they were more than survivors. They were seekers, bound by chance and fate, and by the quiet power of trust. When rain came, soft and cool, they laughed like children, lifting their faces to the sky. Water fell on their skin, washing away the last dust of suffering. Naomi spun in the grass, her hair wet, her smile unguarded. Elias watched, awe in his. In that laughter he saw freedom, the kind he thought he'd never know again. That evening they huddled beneath a rocky ledge as the rain passed. The fire sputtered but survived, casting a warm glow on their faces. Naomi felt her heartbeat quicken each time Elias's eyes lingered on her. The space between them seemed to shrink, filled with unspoken words. Survival had bound them, but now something deeper stirred. As stars emerged from behind the clouds, Elias shared stories of his childhood, of roaming wild hills and chasing dreams that never lasted. Naomi listened, her hand resting near his. She told him of her people's songs that spoke of love as both gift and trial. In their voices different worlds intertwined, becoming one melody of longing. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between them grew undeniable. Naomi found herself watching Elias when he worked, marveling at his patience. He in turn admired the quiet resilience she carried. They were opposites in many ways, yet the desert had woven them together like threads in the same cloth, impossible to unravel. One morning they discovered wild berries along the river's edge. Naomi laughed as her lips stained red from the juice. a sound so pure it startled even her. Elias smiled, brushing a stray leaf from her hair. The moment lingered, simple yet profound. For the first time both realized they were no longer just companions. They were home, but even in this newfound peace, shadows lingered. Naomi feared her people would think she had abandoned them, while Elias wondered if he deserved the gift of her truth. These doubts hung unspoken, but their hands often found each other, wordless reassurances that whatever awaited, they would face it together. The plains stretched wide, but no matter how vast the world became, Naomi no longer felt small within it. With Elias at her side, every horizon looked like a promise. Instead of a threat, she carried the memory of the desert's silence, but now it was tempered by laughter, shared meals and the steady rhythm of footsteps beside her own. One night, the firelight painted Elias's face in gold and shadow. Naomi studied him quietly, tracing the strength in his jaw, the gentleness in his eyes. She realized she no longer feared the unknown, for even if the road ahead was uncertain, she had already found her refuge. It wasn't in the river or the plains, it was in him. Elias too felt the shift. He had wandered for years with no anchor, no hand to steady him, yet this woman, fierce and fragile all at once, had become his compass. He thought back to the moment he first caught her as she stumbled in the desert heat, and understood now, she had saved him as much as he had saved her. As they lay beneath the stars, Naomi's head resting on his shoulder, the world grew quiet around them. The desert trials, the thirst, the storms, all of it had led here, to this embrace. She whispered her name's meaning, I love you, and for the first time, she meant it not just as a word, but as a truth. Elias tightened his arms around her, pressing his cheek to her hair. In that moment there were no more questions, no more fear, only the certainty that two souls lost in different ways had found each other. The desert had tested them, but in its harshness, it had given them the most unexpected gift, refuge in love. The world beyond the plains stretched wide and open, but their hearts carried no fear. Where once Naomi's steps faltered in the desert, now they moved with purpose. Each mile was softened by companionship, each hardship lessened by trust. She no longer carried only her ancestors' strength, she carried Elias's steady presence as well. They found shelter in a grove one evening, where the air smelled of wild flowers. As the fire warmed their camp, Naomi sang an old Apache lullaby her grandmother had taught her. Her voice rose soft but strong, carrying across the night. Elias listened in reverence, knowing he was hearing not just a song but a soul laid bare. Elias reached for her hand as the song faded. Their fingers intertwined naturally, as if the desert itself had shaped them to fit. No promises were spoken, yet everything was clear. The journey had begun in despair, but it had led them here to a bond neither had sought, but both now cherished. In the silence their hearts spoke louder than words. As dawn painted the sky, Elias whispered that he would follow whatever path she chose. Naomi looked at him, tears bright in her eyes. For so long survival had meant solitude, now it meant trust, shared burdens, shared dreams. She pressed her forehead to his chest, and in that embrace, she found the refuge she had prayed for. The desert had tested her body, the journey had tested her spirit, but love had given her renewal. Naomi no longer felt lost. She was found in the river's song, in the strength of her people's memory, and most of all in the arms of the man who had seen her not as a burden but as a woman reborn. Their journey carried them toward distant hills, the land greener with each passing day. Naomi marveled at the change, remembering the endless dunes where she thought her story might end. Elias walked beside her, his presence steady. She realized then that survival had been only the beginning. What they were building now was one evening as twilight deepened, Elias carved shapes into a piece of wood by the fire. Naomi leaned close, curious. He handed it to her, a small figure of a bird, wings spread wide. Freedom, he said softly. She cradled it as though it were sacred, understanding that he saw in her not just survival but flight. When the night turned quiet, Naomi confessed that the desert had shown her visions, dreams of a figure offering salvation. She looked at Elias, her voice trembling. It was you, she whispered. His breath caught, and he pulled her close, holding her as though he too had been waiting for this moment, all along. The fire burned low, casting shadows that swayed like spirits around them. Naomi rested in Elias's arms, the weight of her fears melting away. His heartbeat was steady beneath her ear, a rhythm that grounded her more than the earth itself. For the first time she felt completely at peace, cradled by both destiny and love. When dawn broke, the sky blazed with color, brighter than any she had seen before. It was as if the world itself celebrated their union. Hand in hand they stepped forward, leaving behind the echoes of thirst and despair. The desert had tested them, but it had also given them its greatest gift,